Hey y'all, so today I wanted to talk a little bit about my federal prison story. I just got my phone back. I've been in this halfway house in Wilmington, Delaware for about 12 days. And prior to that, I had been in Otisville Federal Correctional Institution for about 6 months. Before that, I was in Westchester County Jail, New York for about 5 months. And I had some previous time last year in Metropolitan Detention Center, Brooklyn. About a year total I did on a 20-month sentence for wire fraud and threatening a member of Congress. It's a long story, but I just want to, talk a little bit about the time and what it really taught me. Maybe give other people some insight into what prison's like and just some understanding of it. It's not what you think. I can start this story by saying it started out on the morning of June 6, 2021. Was it June 8th? June 8th, I believe it was. I got arrested by the FBI, 6 in the morning. I was sleeping, and I'm laying down on my couch, I hear my last name, Mr. Hall, being yelled. I thought I was dreaming, so I walk up the steps. Guy's pointing an assault weapon at me, and I hear the commotion upstairs, about 10, 15 agents. I say, oh my goodness, this can't be real, So I walk up, he puts me up against the wall, handcuffs me, says I'm under arrest for wire fraud and identity theft. And I knew what it was right away then. I was like, oh my goodness, I didn't think this was going to happen. I had a fake Twitter account of a couple of politicians, including members of the Trump family and former Illinois Governor Blagojevich, and I've been running that Twitter account for shits and giggles for fun, but in the process had used it to promote my personal Twitter account where I sent people over and had an organization that I intended to start called Gay Voices for Trump before the election. I've always loved politics all my life. It's a big passion of mine. So I had an organization I intended to start, and I ended up raising $7,000 off the GoFundMe that I had created. Never ended up coming to fruition. Had a roommate that didn't pay rent. So that money, you can imagine where that went. At the time, I had a significant alcohol problem. Again, didn't think I was going to raise anything. But here we go, $7,000 later, and, I'm using it on rent and alcohol. Went on a vacation, got a little out of hand, and here came the FBI. So that was how it started. I get out on bail that day. They take me down to the federal courthouse in Harrisburg. I'm from a town called Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. They take me down to Harrisburg, put you in a holding cell. You don't know what's going to happen, whether you're going home or not, until you see a judge for your preliminary hearing. So I go for my initial appearance, it is actually, and they let me out on bail, my own recognizance. So I get home on bail. At the time, I'm doing DoorDash as a job, thinking, okay, well, it doesn't look good. I might have to go for 2 years because the mandatory minimum the public defender told me for identity theft was 2 years. So I, of course, never been to prison in my life, don't know anything about it. I'm kind of freaking out, right? I get a job as a hotel clerk at a Best Western. I keep that for a few months. I'm doing well. And next thing you know, I have a serious alcohol problem, as well as Xanax, benzodiazepines, started getting them as Ativan prescribed to me, ended up working my way up to Xans and got a huge addiction to them. It was so hard to overcome that. And I think the stress of everything going on just like quadrupled that. And I got out of control with the drinking, to the point where it wasn't every night anymore. It was like all day, every day. And if I didn't drink, I would get the shakes. And if I didn't use the benzos on top of it, I would get super bad shakes, like blood pressure through the roof. We're talking like 180 over 120, sometimes up in the 200s, just spiking. It was bad, like my whole life revolved basically around getting the next fix. Alcohol would take away the benzo symptoms and vice versa. So I had to get my hands on one of them in order to take away the withdrawal symptoms. So basically that's what everything then became about was, okay, well, I got to do whatever I have to do to get, my hands on this stuff. And alcohol is so easy to acquire. That's why a lot of people have a problem with alcohol out there, because you walk into a gas station and there it is, and it's so cheap too. The Xanax, I had a coworker that was prescribed that was hooking me up. So I got really hardcore into these, and I stopped going to work, started kind of having a vicious cycle of like in and out of rehabs. This is around June 8th, 2021 is when I initially got arrested. This is around like the fall and winter of that year going into 2022. And my PO's getting fed up with me because I'm not returning her calls. She doesn't know what's going on with me. I had been doing really well leading up to this. So go forward to about April. I had a court appearance that was scheduled. And this one was scheduled in the Southern District of New York to take my plea. They were going to drop the identity theft for using the Twitter accounts of the members of the Trump family in exchange for me pleading guilty to wire fraud, which didn't have a mandatory minimum. So this is in New York City. Now, I am supposed to go to this hearing. If I don't appear, you're technically, a bench warrant will go out. You're in contempt of court. So I don't appear because I'm drunk as hell, and I don't want to go there and risk the judge sending me to jail and going through that whole withdrawal process. I'd already been in and out of jail a couple times at that point in early 2022 for stupid stuff like getting into drunken tirades with the police. So I had a seizure in jail back in March of that year. I knew what that was like. That was bad. My salt levels got so low, my metabolism was all messed up. And I knew what that was like. I didn't want to go through that again. I had a feeling the judge was going to send me to prison because of what had been going on with me. So I did not want to go to appear in court. And also, I didn't want to go through, obviously, the withdrawal was the main fear. So I skipped it. And the judge ends up putting out a bench warrant for me, of course. The marshals end up picking me up like the next day. And I end up in the hospital then, because when I'm in the courthouse in Harrisburg waiting to see the judge, I had such a bad withdrawal, like spike in blood pressure. When their nurse came to check it, she said, oh, he needs to go to the hospital. So the marshals then take me to the hospital. So I'm sitting in UPMC Pinnacle Harrisburg, and I do about a week in there for them to stabilize me. My liver was all fucked up, like inflamed and shit. It was bad. So I wait for them to stabilize me there, and then when I get out, I go to Dauphin County Prison, local county, very bad, bad news. Guards were nasty. I actually walked in. The first thing the guard says to me is, "You're going to kill yourself, faggot." It was bad. I never experienced nothing quite like that. And the guards will like openly threaten you, threatening to, they turn on the lights all night. They leave them on to mess with people. It's just not a place you want to go. So luckily I'm only there about 10 days, mostly in quarantine, which is 23 hours a day locked in, only 1 out of the cell an hour for hygiene, like showers and such. So obviously the depression level is really high when people just get in those jails. You're just coming off the street detoxing in most cases. Most people that come into jail are, and then you're sitting on that 23 hours locked in, 1 hour out. It's a pretty messed up situation, you can imagine. You don't get a lot for detox. They'll give you the bare minimum in the prison. I had already been in the hospital for a week, so luckily mine was starting to slow down at that point. I still felt like absolute hell, but I didn't need as much, luckily. So I didn't have a seizure like I did in Cumberland County, where they cut me off my meds. But that's a different story. This was back in March for a stupid arrest. So what ends up happening then is I get moved to MDC, Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, which is a federal holding facility. And it's for any federal inmate, no matter how much time you're facing, no matter what you did. It's just a holding place that all the federal inmates who haven't been, gone to trial or sentencing yet are waiting at. So I end up there for about 3 weeks. And my attorney, Clay, in the meantime, is working on getting me into a long-term rehab program in New York City. So while I'm waiting at MDC, I'm like, oh my God, this is bad, man. Like, I thought Dauphin County was bad. Well, this is like, the worst of the worst in terms of some of these inmates. You're sitting on this quarantine unit, and it's the same kind of thing. We have like a 10-day quarantine up there, and which I really don't understand, because if I could see if you're coming off the street, but I'm coming from a different jail. But I'm sitting on the quarantine, and literally the inmates that are the trustees that are supposed to be working the unit are bringing people their meds, giving people phones, sliding phones under the doors for inmates, giving people drugs. They had marijuana, they had pills, they had stuff all over. They're sliding under the doors. I couldn't believe it. It was unbelievable. And I get up to the main unit, it's just gangs everywhere. Violence, constant threats of violence, lockdowns, 21 hours a day locked in the cell, even when you're on the main unit, because they keep locking down for gang-related violence all the time at MDC. My cellmate was a literal Nazi. He had swastika tattoos. He's trying to tell me, because I'm blonde hair, blue eyes, that I'm the Aryan race and I should see the superiority of my race. And I was like, oh, get me out of here. It was bad. I never experienced anything like that. And it was just a very odd situation to be thrown into. So luckily, it didn't last long at MDC, though, only a couple of weeks. And I get moved to this rehab, then I get out. This is in June of last year, 2022. So I go to this rehab, everything's going well. It's called Odyssey House in New York City. Everything's going really good. And I messed up then. I had a relapse in August of 2022 after about 2.5, 3 months. I come home. I clearly wasn't ready to come home. I start going through my drawer, and there was a prescription vial of Ativan, and I'm like, oh God. So I started taking them, started drinking, and that went to hell real quick. I ended up being sent back to Odyssey House by my probation officer, and I'm in the streets in New York City, trying to find Odyssey House. I took a bus that my dad got me. His parents were with me all the way trying to help. So I get a bus, and I remember the Odyssey House wouldn't take me because I was actively intoxicated at the time. I had to go through a detox, so they wouldn't take me into the program. So they refer me to this detox in a town called Yonkers, New York, and they drive me there. I'm in the detox, right? And obviously, when you're feeling like that, it's a hard thing to explain, right, for people who don't use alcohol or drugs. But when you're withdrawing from it, you literally are like doing, anything you can. Your body's basically screaming for it. I mean, you're sweating, you're shaking, your body's like crying out, feed me, basically. It's bad. So, I mean, you're like in intense 24/7 craving for your drug of choice. And that's if you're hooked on alcohol, like doing it all day, every day. And benzos do the same thing. They suppress your nervous system. So when you suddenly take them out, your nervous system goes into like an overdrive. It doesn't know how to react because it's like, oh, I haven't worked for this long because the drug and alcohol has been doing the work for me. So I am fiending really bad for alcohol. So the detox is not doing, in my opinion, enough, probably because I was hooked on stuff at the time. They're not giving me very many, they give you benzos to come down from alcohol. They're not really giving me a lot except like a couple Librium pills. I'm like, oh man, I'm going out to get drunk. So you're irrational, right? You're completely irrational when you're in this mindset. So I leave the rehab. I'm not on my meds. I don't even have my meds with me. I'm bipolar, so I take a medication called lamotrigine. It also is a good medication for seizures too. It does both. I actually take it for both ever since I had that seizure March in the county jail. But I'm off my bipolar meds. That's why I talk really fast, by the way, is bipolar. And I leave. I make the irrational decision to leave and go get alcohol and start drinking in the streets of Yonkers, right? And drunkenly, I'm on social media. This is a couple days. I'm sleeping on the streets, just crazy behavior, right? And I get on social media and I see, because I'm very political, as you know, but based on my charges, I see a post on a right-wing website that I'm on with a congressman's phone number. Congressman from California, Eric Swalwell's his name. His phone number, people have been calling him, leaving messages. Not very nice messages, obviously. A lot of hate mail, that sort of thing, which I got a lot of on Twitter. I know what it's all about. But drunkenly, I decide to, pick up the phone and call. And I don't remember anything from that point. I don't even remember, to be honest with you, picking up the phone and doing it. I just know that I did it because I've seen the transcript of it since I've been locked up. And I called, I guess, and made several threats to him. And his staff was the ones that picked up. I guess I said something along the lines of, be careful, I got a lot of AR-15s, I'm coming to the office, something along those lines. I don't even remember, like I said, the remarks. I don't remember the phone calls. It was 4 of them total, I guess, from what I've read. But it was a shock. I don't know what I was thinking, what I was on. I just know I was in a bad situation. severely panicked, off my meds, and I was basically ready to go. I was going to make a run to my favorite beach and just continue to drink and possibly drink myself to death, I think was what I was planning, because the doctor was saying, oh, your liver's in bad shape. Things aren't looking good for you right now. So I'm going through a mental crisis too. It's not just it's not like I just had this, decided to have a plan to do it. It was more of I was acting on a whim. And it was there was no logic to it. It was what that was. That was a drunken tirade, similar to if you've seen the Mel Gibson tapes, where he called his girlfriend, and there was one where he got pulled over by a cop and went on about Jews when he was drunk. He had a serious alcohol problem, and when people who have like mental health issues under a lot of stress, off medication, and alcohol on top of it, something like that can get really bad. It can happen. But the important thing to me is there was no merit to any of it. I never meant any of what I said. I don't even own a gun. So what happens then is I end up getting arrested in a liquor store trying to steal liquor because I ran out. And that was my mindset. I just tried to steal it then, because you'll try to do anything to, to continue to get drunk. So I try to steal it. The cops arrest me, take me to Yonkers City Police Station. I'm like, oh shit. I don't even know at this point about the phone call. That's the crazy thing. I don't even know about the phone call to the congressman. I'm just thinking, okay, this is like, this is the arrest for me stealing the alcohol. This will be fine. I'll get out on bail and go where I go. And I have this issue going on though with the PO trying to get hold of me. She has no idea that I'm not at the detox anymore. So I'm like, oh shit, that's what really worried me more than anything at that time. I was worried about the probation officer detaining me for the other charges, because I was still out on bail technically, awaiting to get sentenced for the wire fraud. So I'm like, okay, this isn't going to be good. I didn't know just how bad it was going to get. I thought it couldn't get worse, and I was wrong. I get to Westchester County Jail then, and they had not given me bail. They charged me with a larceny, and that's basically stealing a value of under $1,000. Didn't give me bail, so they sent me to Westchester County Jail, New York. I have no idea where this is at. It's not a bad jail. Apparently it's the 4th richest county in the United States. It really wasn't bad. The worst part, when you get there again, you do that quarantine. There, the quarantine was like 2 weeks. And for me, my 2 weeks was up on a weekend on a Saturday, so it ended up being a couple of days longer. It was like a 17-day quarantine, which was crazy. I mean, I'm just depressed. I had to go through the withdrawal again. They don't do a very good job of detoxing you in the county jail, or any prison for that matter. So I had to go through all that. I'm sitting just crying, depressed in the cell, like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm here again. And that's really that. And then I call my dad and I find out, oh my gosh, you made a phone call to a congressman. There's another charge coming. I said, what are you talking about? I said, I don't recall that at all. And this was the first time I had heard of it. And I said, is it a misdemeanor or a felony? He says, it's a felony. I said, oh, this is terrible. So then I'm really freaking out, not knowing how much time I'm looking at. And my attorney, Clay, who was great the whole way, comes and visits me. And he says, this is not good. The prosecutor obviously doesn't know that you are not really a threat, and this was just words. The prosecutor thinks that you're dangerous, so they're offering a plea bargain kind of thing, but it's going to end up being a year or 2 or maybe 3, he tells me, when he first comes to visit. And I'm thinking, for me, a year, 2, or maybe 3 is a big deal, because I've never been to prison before. So that's scary for me. I'm 24 years old, as a young guy, hearing that. So I decide, okay, the best course of action, while of course I would like to fight it and use the defense that Clay proposes we could use about being basically too intoxicated to know what I was doing, and that is a valid defense if you can prove it. We really had no way of proving that, unfortunately, so we decided to then just take the guilty plea. I decided, after thinking it over for a couple weeks, that would be the best course of action, try to resolve it as quickly as possible, take responsibility, and try to get the least sentence possible. So that's what I decided to do. So I go before Judge Woods. I had a judge named Keenan who was 92 years old. He ended up retiring, luckily, before this sentencing and before this other charge came up. I had pled guilty to the wire fraud in front of him, but he had ended up retiring then before shit really hit the fan, so to speak. So I ended up pleading to the new charge in front of Judge Woods. And I'm in Westchester County this whole time. My mental health, of course, I'm struggling. I'm suffering. Prison's hard, and you're around people you don't know. I had no idea who any of these people were. I'm from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Here we are in Westchester County, New York. I met some really good people that looked out for me, though. One guy named Maurice the Rock Jackson, I called him. I hope he's doing well. I know he had about 5 years he was looking at. He was a fantastic guy. We talked football all the time. He was a big UFO guy, into those podcasts and stuff. Just a normal, ordinary guy, really just wanted to get back to his family. I tried to teach him a little about politics, too. He was really the only one I met in there, though, that I really hit it off with, that I would consider like a normal type of individual who didn't have the prison mentality. Most of the people there, it wasn't their first time. They had a prison mindset. I had nothing in common, really, with them. It was very tough, but I get to my sentencing date finally. This is December 19th of last year, 2022. I had been in Westchester County for 4 months at this time. I get sentenced, and I'm going in. It's a lot of nerves. I'm a bundle of nerves. Get taken in that morning, waking up early by the guards. They take you down to a holding cell where you wait, pretty much all day. And then when you're in the courthouse, you're in a holding cell waiting for your hearing. So my family's all going to be there. I know that. That's a little bit comforting, but it's still very nerve-wracking going in front of a federal judge. So I'm sitting in. Finally, it's my time. I get called. They chain you up, right? When they take you to transport you to court, every single time when I went for my plea, when I went for my sentencing, you have handcuffs that go on your wrists. They put a chain around your waist, and that chain connects the handcuffs to it, as well as they put shackles on your legs. So your feet are like shackled together, so you're kind of walking like a fucking crip, doing the crip walk in there kind of thing, like a penguin or something. It's bizarre. So you're chained up real bad, and they do this every time you go to court. So I walk in, there's my family, I'm in chains and stuff. It's a very weird situation. I never would have in a million years thought this could be happening to me. So it was emotional, it was hard, but the judge starts his spiel then, and we get the hearing underway, and gives me a chance to speak. He read my family's letters. They all wrote letters on my behalf. And really, I took responsibility for everything. I said, Your Honor, to be honest with you, I do not remember making that phone call. I would tell you 100% if I did, but I acknowledge that I did do it. I heard the recording, I saw the transcript, and I acknowledge I was wrong, and I would never hurt anyone. I have never hurt anyone in my life. And I just was a kid that had a serious alcohol problem. Let my mental and physical health deteriorate and let my family down, and here we are. And, I asked him, I said I would pray and beg for your compassion and mercy, and and before you hand down this sentence. And he took everything into consideration. He actually ended up stopping the hearing after I made my statement, and he stopped the hearing for about, it was a good 20-25 minutes. I talked to my family. We got some reporters that sat in and listened to that and wrote some not so nice things, because my family and I's conversation, which was private, it was actually a lighthearted conversation. They just took things out of context. But I talked to my family, and it was really emotional time. I sat there and waited for the judge to come back, and I'm a pretty anxious person. I really, for whatever reason, I just felt at peace at that moment. I wasn't anxious. I was more so just like, okay, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I was honest. I took responsibility for this from the start. I took a plea deal immediately, didn't fight the government and make them use any more resources than they had to, because I know that's often what it comes down to when it comes to sentencing. If you fight them, they're going to punish you for it, and I wouldn't do that. So I took responsibility, and the judge took compassion on me. He came back. He started the sentencing, handed down a 20-month sentence. My guidelines were 27 to 33 months. He went under the guidelines. He was very compassionate. I was very respectful and appreciative of Judge Woods. I thought he took everything into consideration, all things considered. Now, I didn't agree with the fact that, me having to go to prison, obviously. I would have wanted to see, an alcohol program continue and probation. On top of that, strict probation, maybe house arrest type thing. But that's just, you're always going to see it that way from your point of view. I just thought Judge Woods tried to consider everything and was fair, and you know, he was a very nice man. I even shook hands with the prosecutor. I liked them on a personal level. Aside from sitting across the room prosecuting me, I liked them actually on a personal level. It might sound weird, but they were nice people, and it was classy and very nice of him to come over and do that and shake my hand. And Judge Woods, like I said, when he did that, the 20 months, I said, well, you know, it could be worse. Clay said, well, we can't appeal, unfortunately, because he went below the guidelines. We can't appeal the sentence. He thought maybe I'd be disappointed. I said, Clay, honestly, it could be a lot worse. You know, I'm going to have to process this, but I felt pretty good, you know, overall, knowing I could get through it because I had already gotten through about 6 months to that point. And then the more inmates reassured me when I got back from the sentencing, I told my family, don't worry, don't sweat it, like I'm all right, it'll be okay. The more other inmates were telling me how the federal system works and that I'll actually end up getting far more time off for good time, the First Step Act, and that, by the way, there was a bipartisan law that's signed by President Trump in 2018. It's helped a lot of federal inmates get time off with nonviolent nonviolent offenses. So I was very happy at that point, knowing that I'm going to get more time off from this First Step Act for my good time, which the feds give you 15% of your sentence off in good time. That meant 3 months automatically coming off my 20-month sentence. And also halfway house, which is actually where I'm at right now, in a halfway house in Wilmington, Delaware, hometown of Joe Biden. But that's where I'm at. And I got 5 months of halfway house. So that ended up taking my sentence down to a little bit under a year, because when you actually factor in the First Step Act on top of the halfway house, it took it down to below a year total. So then, after the sentencing, you wait for the marshals to pick you up. The U.S. Marshals are responsible for transporting any federal inmate. So I'm in the federal system. I'm a federal detainee in a county jail, Westchester. So I'm waiting on the marshals. It was December 19th I got sentenced. Marshals ended up showing up like January 27th, I think it was, like over a month after. They don't give you any hints whatsoever. You sit on that block in the county jail all day, like a square block, you know, just nothing to do, watch TV, read, push-ups, you know, sit-ups, you know, socialize shoot the shit with the other inmates. That's about it. It's miserable, but you sit there all day just waiting, and I waited for the marshals. And one day, people were telling me, Josh, just be patient. One day they're just going to show up. You won't know. You'll just call you down. And it's exactly what happened. One morning I wake up, and they say, Hall, and, you know, booking, and they called me, and I went down, and there they were. And there's a bunch of other guys in a holding cell. They don't bring any of the property. Like, my ID was in Westchester County. Didn't bring any of that with me, because a lot of the federal inmates are doing so much time, I guess. They figure, what's even the point of bringing this guy's property? He's not going to get out for like 10, 15 years. My sentence just happened to be short, so now I really need my ID, and we're working on getting that back. But they transported me in the van. They chain everybody up, just like the court procedure, transport me back to, wait for it, MDC, Metropolitan Detention Center, Brooklyn. Don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but that's where R. Kelly and Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's partner in crime, were actually imprisoned at while they awaited for trial. So Maxwell's been sentenced now. She's down in Florida somewhere. But they were both prisoned there in Brooklyn. And Brooklyn is very bad. I'm thinking, oh my God, please, just Lord have mercy, get me out of here. It took them days to get me my medication, and I take a blood pressure and the seizure one and the bipolar and all that, and I'm thinking, this is not good. It takes you days to even see a nurse. Nurse is asking me if I'm a junkie, if I'm trying to get illegal pills. I don't know if he's trying to like entice me or solicit me, but that's what she asked me straight up. People are, orderlies, trustees are passing drugs and phones underneath the cells again. I mean, it's crazy. It's literally like the Wild West up in there. You're locked in 23 hours a day. So finally, about 10 days in Brooklyn, you know, holding my breath, just praying I'm going to get out of there. The marshals show up again. And they end up transporting me on a bus with a bunch of other inmates, probably about 50 of us, to Otisville, New York. And that's the correctional facility. And luckily there was a man in MDC that was pretty competent, one of the only ones I would say that did tell me where I was going, a place called Otisville. I had no idea where it was, what it was. Told my mom on the phone, she looks it up, it's a medium security federal prison. So I know where I'm going at least, that's one good thing. So when we do like maybe, I'd say it was an hour and a half long trip. You're chained up in this bus, right? Like sitting next to other guys, chained up, can barely move your hands. And you're eating, like trying to eat the meal they give you, the bag lunch with the peanut butter and jelly, trying to fucking, spread your peanut butter and jelly with your hands just like locked in place. Like it was the most uncomfortable thing. And you're riding along the highway, along other cars, in a bus, chained up, like not free, but looking out into the free world, feeling sort of free. It's like a mind fuck, because you go from prison to, for all those months you were sitting, to like, okay, I'm on the highway now, but I'm also chained up in a bus. So it was very depressing, very weird feeling, but I get to Otisville and go through the processing there, sit in the holding cell, not really knowing what to expect. It's my first time in federal prison. Luckily, it would end up being a short stay, only about 6 months. So I expect, this is in February 2nd, I believe it was, is whenever they transported me there, Groundhog Day. So whenever I get to Otisville, I go to a block called GA. There's like 7 units there. And I ended up on a pretty good unit. I met some people right away. This is a medium security prison, so you got inmates of all different types. You do have violent inmates there that have a lot of time. It was not a pen. It was a step below a penitentiary. Only reason I ended up in a medium was because they do it based off of a score, and because one of my offenses was threatening a member of Congress and my age below 25, they ended up giving me a pretty high score, so I had to go to a medium, unfortunately, instead of a low or a federal camp, which is the best. That's where everybody wants to be. So I had to deal with that, and plus I was like one of the shorter sentences there. Like literally when I would talk to other inmates, they'd be like, oh yeah, like, okay, you literally did nothing, or like laugh about the time I had, because you have guys there that are never going home, some that are doing 25, 30 years. So it was pretty much, my time was a joke to a lot of them. They acted like I did really nothing, because to them I didn't, compared to what a lot of these guys did. There was gangbangers, there was sex offenders who did some really heinous stuff. Honestly, those are the ones that people do not associate with at all. If you're a sex offender in federal prison, I learned real quick seeing some of these people, you're in trouble. Like people don't want them at the tables. That's the first thing people ask you is, are you a sex offender? Can I see your paperwork? Luckily, though I'm a little bit of a quirky man and a little weird to some people, I definitely did not belong in prison, and they could tell, was not a prison person. But I had good paperwork. All things considered, you could literally have like gunned down 10 people in federal prison. That's good paperwork because you're not a sex offender, fun fact. So it was very interesting for me to learn that real quick. You have to be careful who you talk to, because if you're seen associating too closely, with some of them, you can be labeled very quickly, and you kind of get stereotyped into that. And plus, I was very uncomfortable, to be honest with you, with what some of those guys did. It was really the only group that did make me uncomfortable, hearing some of the cases. So it's a very troubling thing when you have children involved. I can understand where people are coming from with that, but that is a true fact, is sex offenders are very much taboo in prison and not well liked. So I had a good group of guys I got in with. When I first got there, I had my own cell that only lasted a couple of days. The cells are about 8 by 12 in length, maybe 6 by 10, something like that. Not very big, but I had my own cell a couple days, got in with a guy then. They were gonna put a guy in my cell that had been there for a while. He was a big drug user. K2 is big in the federal prisons. It's called deuce, they call it. It's like a synthetic form of marijuana. It gets you high as a motherfucker. I couldn't believe this, how much common this is, just all over, people smoking it, just strung out. So I come back one day from medical, one of my initial medical appointments, into my cell, and there's a guy sitting there strung out as hell, just sitting there, right? He's kneeling over, nodding out over the chair in the cell. I said, oh no, this is not gonna work. They put this guy in my cell. He's got stuff spread all over. He's, asking me if I do it, if I smoke, and I'm like, oh, this is bad, because oftentimes people that get caught doing it, they kind of get stuck. It's called like it's almost like a paralysis where they like pass out in midair, right? And they're like frozen. And they will then get taken to the SHU, which is solitary confinement. If you're with them in the cell, they can't really prove whose K2 it was. So you get lumped in then and you can get taken to the SHU. That was my fear. So luckily I met a guy named Rick. And Rick was fantastic. He is about 60 years old. He's long hair, ponytail from West Virginia. I've been in federal prison for 26 years, since 1997, longer than I've been alive. I was born in 99. So it's unbelievable to me how long this guy's done. And Rick ends up saying, I go up to Rick, I ask him about moving in because he has an open spot in his cell, the top bunk. And Rick at first is hesitant. He doesn't know me, and a lot of people smoke there. He just says, I don't want no crackheads. That was his big thing. He don't want no one that smokes. He's on his way out. He's actually getting out. God bless the man, next year after all that time. It was a nonviolent charge, by the way. We'll get into that, like how I believe people have been over-sentenced a lot with nonviolent charges. But Rick's getting out next year. So he takes me in, then he says, oh, hell, I'll give the boy a chance. He don't smoke. He's a little retarded, but he don't smoke. So he takes me in. Rick's very politically incorrect, you can tell. He takes me in. We get along really good right off the bat. I'm thinking, okay, this is good because, yeah, he's a little rough around the edges. He's a little bit of a hard ass. Definitely wasn't afraid to tell me how he felt and be hard on me. Kind of like a fatherly/grandfatherly figure saying, boy, don't you ever come back to prison kind of thing. Because he knew my time was short, and he knew I was not a prison person. And he was in the pen. Rick was in like Tucson, Arizona, like Big Sandy, Kentucky, some big pens where there's like stabbings every day, serious stuff, right? So he knows, you come back again, it's not going to be good. And he really looked out for me. I owe a lot to Rick for looking out for me throughout my time there, because he didn't have to do that and take me in. I think I couldn't tell you all the times he told me, I'm gonna you're gonna have to go find a cell, boy, like he was gonna get me out of there. But everyone said, oh, Rick loves you, Josh. He just, he's just been in so long. It changes people. I can understand it. And the time definitely took an impact on him. But he definitely did. I think he realized the positive outweighed the benefit in having me as a cellie, because you don't know who's gonna come next, unfortunately, in terms of who you're going to have live there. So I slept on the top bunk. Yes, you do have to shit in front of your fellow inmate at night when you're locked in. If someone's got to go, hey, when you got to go, right? So you try to go during the day, use the bathroom when the other person's out of the cell doing something. You put up try to put up like a towel or something over the door to signal you're going to the bathroom. But at night when you got to go, hey, you got to go. When we're all men. So you get used to it. So that's one thing. Another thing is the food in federal prison was so much better than county. It was unreal. There was a national menu they followed. So it's like Monday they mix it up. Tuesday, I think it was chicken patty. Wednesday, hamburgers. Thursday, fried chicken. Friday, fish. Weekends is a brunch, pancakes and stuff. Food is so much better than county. But really, it's not great, I won't say the food's good because it is prison, but the county is like literally unidentifiable slop in every county I've been to. Otisville, at least the food, you could identify what you're eating. I know that's a low bar to hold it on, but honestly, I'll take it for what it was. So generally, people I know, prison gets a reputation as bad food. Otisville, I'd rate the food like a 6 out of 10, 5 out of 10 maybe. Not gourmet, but it was edible. So that was another thing. As far as the day-to-day activities, right? So when I first got to Otisville, I heard a lot about programs. People have been talking about programs under the First Step Act you could take to get time off your sentence. So I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be really good. I'm going to take program all day, every day, get time off. Well, it's really not like that, to be honest with you. There's only a couple of programs I was able to get in on being on the waiting list for like dozens of them. I got in one called NRDAP, which is the Non-Residential Drug Abuse Program. And I got in another called Drug Education. And they're under the First Step Act. So basically what it means is when you're in a program or on the waiting list for a program, under First Step Act, you get 10 days off a month in credits that you're enrolled in them. So being that I was enrolled in 5 months worth of programs since I was there, I got about 50 days off my sentence just for even being on the waiting list, not even taking them. So I only had the opportunity to take 2 that became available during that 6 months I was there. It wasn't many at all. The programs themselves, very short, very minimum. It's like you get like a packet you got to fill out. At the end of the RDAP, we wrote like a goodbye letter, like what we're going to do to stay clean and sober. You have like meetings that often descended into like nonsense where people were gang members talking about the hood during the meetings. I mean, that's really what pretty much it was. It was like a foreign language to me. But straight up, that's how it was. The programs were somewhat of a joke, in my opinion. Yes, it did take time off, which was good. That's the one good thing about the First Step Act, is it does take some time off, which is better than nothing, right? Because before, when they got rid of parole in the federal system, there was literally nothing in terms of time that came off except the 15%. Now at least you're getting like 1/3 of a month off for every month that you're doing programs for. Even though they're kind of a joke, just being on the waiting list takes that time off. So I will say the First Step Act is something I'm on board with 100%. They need to expand it and just continue making new laws that grow on top of that, because it's something that I saw personally inmates talk about and how it has moved their release date up. Guys that have been in so many years for nonviolent charges, they made a mistake years ago. They didn't hurt anybody, didn't kill anybody. Oftentimes it involved drugs or alcohol, like my case, obviously. A lot of my actions were influenced by drugs and alcohol, and they deserve another chance. And that's what the First Step Act's all about, is taking some of that time off that otherwise, unfortunately, they would not get. And that's why I'm 100% in favor of it, and I think they need to continue to expand it. But that's one of the biggest problems with the federal system, I will say, is it's a lack of rehabilitation. You know, in the day-to-day life, you can go outside, you can walk around the track. There's sports, like there's tennis, there's volleyball, baseball, some basketball. I remember people playing. There's a gym. There's weightlifting. They got a library. I would go down to the library often. I'm a political junkie, I'm so sure you could tell, so I'd read all kinds of political books. I read a lot of Stephen King, thanks to my grandmother. Shout out, she sent me a lot of that. I'm a big Stephen King horror guy. Read a couple about a guy named Crazy Eddie Antar, Retail Gangster it's called. He was the big owner of the retail chain of the electronics store, big fraudster. Read one about Ross Ulbricht, one of my libertarian heroes, and his creation of the Silk Road. He's now in federal prison for life. Another ridiculous sentence, in my opinion, because his entire case was nonviolent drug offense at a young age. And if it's really about rehabilitation, I would argue we need to focus on getting people like that, giving them another chance, not just, confining them to die in a cage. That's not what this country was founded on. It's a compassionate country, and we do owe people, in my opinion, a second chance, especially people who have not hurt others. There's a different story when you've hurt a kid, or when you've, violently, killed someone, raped someone, something like that, where there's indisputable proof you've been convicted of. That's one thing. I can absolutely understand keeping someone like that behind bars, and that's what prison should be for, the worst of the worst. But to let people who have been nonviolent and in there for a very long time, such as my cellie, just rot away, that is a principle that I strongly disagree with. And being in there for even the 6 months that I was, just affirmed that 100%, because I saw a lot of that. And in the day-to-day life, there's not much offered as far as what you can do. There's a lot of hanging around the unit, watching television. You really learn. I honestly came in there more so learning to become how people become criminals and what leads up to it. And actually, you can learn if you actually are a professional criminal, right? You go in learning how to be a better criminal. That's kind of like what they promote, because when you think about it, you are surrounded by that on a day-to-day basis. The drugs, people doing drugs all day, every day, right? The mindset, when you're not given education and you're not given those rehabilitative measures, you are then just, reaffirming what you know and sharing it with others, and basically creating like a support group for criminals. And that's kind of what unfortunately has happened in the system. Don't know what the state's like, never been to the state, but I'm just speaking from my experience with the feds. Another thing that was terrible, in particular for those of us who do have mental health diagnoses, there really was not much in form of, and by not much I mean like non-existent in terms of mental health treatment. Yes, I did get my medication, But in terms of having a psychiatrist or a counselor to talk to on a daily basis, I emailed, because we had computers where you could go on and email the staff if you needed something. I emailed the psychiatrist like 3 times, right? Nothing. Didn't even, told him I was depressed, wanted to talk, like I've been in therapy all my life. It's a helpful thing for me. Did not even hear a word from the guy. He did an initial intake, because they have to by law when you first get there. So on paper, it might look good, right? Same with the First Step Act. On paper, it all looks good when you hear prison reform, but when you get there and see it in person, it's a lot different. And that's how it was with the psychiatry. It might look good on paper that you're getting that, psychiatric intake when you come in, because they have to do it by law. But beyond that, nothing really happened in the way of, in the form of any kind of psychological help or counseling or just checking how you're doing even, once a week or something. There was nothing like that whatsoever. So people with mental health issues, unless you're like actively suicidal, which I was not. So if you would tell them you're suicidal, what they'll do, they'll take you down into medical and they'll put you in a cell and they will watch you basically 24/7. They will have a guard or another inmate, when it's the inmate shift that has the job, watch you. And other than that, I mean, you're not given any sort of help unless you're like at the brink of taking your life. Even then, it's going to watch you to make sure you don't do it. They're not really going to help you. So it's pretty crazy. It's pretty much like the Wild West. The jobs they pay about, like, for example, I didn't have a job when I was there because out of principle, I was not going to work for 60 cents an hour. People are getting, generally speaking, about, I think people said about $30 a month to do dishes in the kitchen. So the jobs there, not great in terms of the pay. Something I'm definitely not used to. And as a guy who worked hotels, did some DoorDash on the side. Never had the best jobs out there. Obviously have not really been the most successful individual in my personal life outside of prison. But even that, for a guy like me, a little bit of an insult. Would not do it. Did not want to participate in that. I focused on myself, my mental health, and just trying to manage it. You really have to rely on other inmates, to be able to get through the time. There's a lot of people I'm thankful for that helped me through the hard days. And I know a lot of them, you have to kind of put on a tough front. I know a lot of them at heart are not bad people. They're not really, these hard-ass personas they put on, because I've talked to them on a personal, individual, one-on-one level and gotten out the true feelings a lot of them have and heard. And they're not like that. It's a lot of that is a show that you kind of have to put on, unfortunately, in there. But there's a lot of guys that helped me through my time. And I do want to thank them, profoundly, because I don't think I would have been able to do it if it weren't for the people that looked out for me in there. And I hope I was able to provide something positive into their life as well. Because honestly, I've learned one thing about prison, and it's you can make, a positive thing out of the worst situations in your life. And it's the worst things that happen to us that truly test our character and reveal who we are as people. And I feel as if the way a lot of people carried themselves in there, it brought out, the best in people in a way. You saw who was good and who, wasn't so good. And for me, it proved to me that I can get through anything in my life, and that, I can stand the tests I never, maybe years ago, would have thought I would have been able to get through. Definitely emotionally was hardening a little bit. It felt weird getting, released into the halfway house. I'll tell you how that went down. So this was on July 5th, 12 days ago now. So what happened, Miss Moretic, my counselor, I shouldn't even say her name. I don't know why I did that, but she puts my paperwork in for halfway house. It comes back a couple weeks later. She says, oh, you're leaving July 5th. This was back in late May, early June. So I have to wait a couple of weeks before I can go. And the day after the 4th of July, how's that symbolic for you? Freedom, right? America, baby. They end up, calling me down in first thing in the morning, 5:30. Call me down to the R&D, which is where they release you and do your intake. And basically, all it was, they gave me a paperwork with an itinerary that said every train I was to take that day. And it had down step-by-step instructions. They gave me an envelope with $100 for food, a cab if I needed a taxi to get to this place once I got off the train. And that was it. They drove me to the Otisville train station, a couple minutes away from the prison, sent me on my way, and that was it. I mean, it was literally, they asked me for my social security number and my birth date to verify who I was before I walked out the door, and that process probably took like 5 minutes to release me from the prison, and then I was out. Like, it was literally the craziest feeling, and then I'm in a train station before you know it. I took Otisville 1 to Newark Penn Station. I'm in a train station surrounded by people for the first time in like a year. Just such an odd feeling, you know, like honestly, it was a relieving feeling. It was a greater high than any alcohol or pill has ever or could ever give me. You know, I felt just unbelievably ecstatic to be out of there. And it's one of those things where until you lose your freedom, you really don't know like the meaning of it. And you know how great it truly is that we do have it. So I felt the weight of that right away, and I was so happy to be out of there. And I reported here right away. I was not gonna fail to report and end up back in there because the BOP called here as soon as I got here and said, "Did he report?" And the answer is yes. If I wouldn't have, they would have been looking for me full force, the U.S. Marshals, and I would have been right back up until my release date. I'm technically still in BOP custody right now. My release date is November 17th of this year. I am going to be officially on supervised release and free of this chapter of my life within the Bureau of Prisons. So hooray to that. Cheers to that, guys. It was a hard journey. It was a really long journey. But in the end, I learned a lot about myself. I am becoming still to this day a stronger person, still adjusting, and I've been able to lean on my family and some close friends. I got some really nice letters, you know, the whole time, and that's really helped me, you know, through the whole thing. So, yeah, that's really all I could think of. Oh, and the homosexuality. People do have sex a lot in prison because even men that have been down for a long time, you know, we have needs. We're guys, you know, and we're human beings. We got to get it. So you see a lot of that behind closed doors. There is openly a lot of transgenders in there too that definitely have their way of doing their hustle. Everyone has what's called their hustle, right, which is like their way of making money. So the transgenders, their hustle involves a lot of like, you know, blow, if you know what I'm saying. They do what they got to do. I respect it. I've always been a supporter of sex work, so I can't knock it too much, right? So you do see a lot of that. That is one true thing. A lot of homosexuality. I personally did not drop the soap. That was one accomplishment that I'm very proud of myself about. I am actually a bisexual man. I didn't drop the soap in prison. I wouldn't do it in there. But I made it back, baby. I was in the big house. Now I'm back, so that's the important thing. A lot of good people out there, famous people, were previous felons who have went on to really make something of themselves. So to be honest, it's something that my life isn't over, you know, and I have a lot of hope for the future, and you got to remember that too. Always take the positives. And a lot of people believe in me, and that warms my heart because they know who I am as a person and who I've always been. And it's really what gave me the strength and, you know, motivation to push through the entire process. As far as the COs, the guards in prison, it depends on the individual. Like with anything I've learned in life, used to have a big problem with authority. I still do believe absolute authority corrupts. I'm a libertarian at heart, I've discovered, but the COs, most of them stayed out of your way, pretty respectful in the feds. County ones tend to be nasty. County ones, like in Dauphin County, were the ones that called me a faggot and telling me to kill myself, and it was bad. But generally speaking, the federal COs, pretty nice overall, just kind of stayed out of your way, don't really mingle or fuck with you like the county ones. And really the atmosphere starts at the top. You know, if they're setting a bad tone, you're going to have that kind of response amongst the inmates. I think there's a lot more of a fear of the federal inmates that they have because they realize that, you know, these guys, a lot of them have nothing to lose, particularly the ones with a lot of time. So you don't exactly want to piss off somebody that has, you know, like years to go, like they're never coming home. That's not someone you want to piss off. And I think a lot of the federal COs understood that, and hence they treated you with a lot more respect. Yeah, I was around guys, like I said, someone got a 200-year sentence for doing stuff to children. I mean, it was bad, like some of those dudes. And it was, you know, it was, like I said, humbling too, to have your freedom taken from you and go back to living a restricted life with, absolutely nothing. I would listen to the radio a lot at night. It was the one thing that gave me hope and positivity. Listen to politics a lot on the radio. Sports, stayed engaged with NFL in Westchester County last year. And NASCAR, I got huge into NASCAR. That was my hustle, as I call it, right? I ran a NASCAR pool with some of my homies in there. And, Rick, he was a NASCAR fan. We had some dudes in there, huge NASCAR fans. And we would actually put in a jackpot of stamps we would use as the currency. Everybody would bet, like if you picked, 3 drivers, you bet 3 stamps. And then the winner would take the entire pot every week. I actually won 4 times out of about 15 weeks there. I got really good at it. I'm a NASCAR junkie, so I had a little bit of an advantage, but that was something that did help me pass the time, and was actually really fun that I'm gonna, definitely always remember. And if you ask me if I'll miss anything about federal prison, I would say no, that place sucked. But only thing I will say is some of the people in there I will miss. They don't deserve to be there. We need to reform the prison system in terms of allowing particularly nonviolent drug offenders to get a second chance, and because many of them can contribute positively to the society in this world. And it's one of the things I do plan on trying to raise awareness for and advocate for, because there's a lot of people in there just rotting away that, they have families too and they didn't kill anybody. And yes, they made a mistake, and absolutely justifiable to punish them. But the question is, we need to, take more weight into account of how long we're doing that for, I think. So I do believe strongly in prison reform, and I think as time goes on, you will see something like that get done. So that's the one thing I will miss, is some of the homies and friends that I made and met in there, because there were some memorable moments. And I was a little bit of a legend in there too myself, I guess. I think people appreciated my candor and that I wasn't afraid to just be myself and who I am. And like I said, I'm a quirky man. I was goofy. What can I say? I try to have a good time, make people laugh. People are doing time, so you got to be a little careful with how you approach that. But I wanted to bring some sunshine into people's lives too. You got to try to, like I always say, take the good with the bad. So I tried to keep it as positive and lighthearted as I could. I tried to keep my sense of humor. And I met a lot of people in there that really did. I'll never forget them. I'll never forget some of the people. And when you're in a situation like that where you're locked in with people, and a traumatic situation and cut off from the world, sometimes you grow a really strong bond with people who are going through something like that. And I think that's one thing that I will always cherish, is the bond that I personally, with a couple of those guys, did develop. So yeah, that's about it, guys. This has been like an hour-long video, holy shit, about my experience in federal prison. So I hope everybody enjoyed. I look forward to continuing to talk about this journey, and maybe answering some more questions down the road if anybody ever has them. I'm always willing to talk. It's a tough thing going on. It's a hard world these days. A lot of stuff going on out there. But just always remember the most vulnerable. Always remember the people that are forgotten about. Not all of them, not everybody in there is a scumbag. I understand that the majority of them were guilty and did what they did, but not everybody, in a certain place or group is a scumbag. I'm a convicted felon, and I certainly don't think of myself as one. I could tell you that a lot of the guys I met in there, I don't believe at heart that they are. They just made a bad choice. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. And that was my federal prison experience 2K23. Everybody, have a great day.